Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. By sharing stories of successes and triumphs, we aim to challenge the dominant narrative that often negatively portrays our disenfranchised populations. I'm your host, Charles Williams, an educator for 15 years, a current school principal in Chicago, and an educational consultant. Let's get started. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Don't believe me? Here's 5 reasons why. First, it's free. Second, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. 4, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And 5, it's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Livia Chan is an educator who is passionate about community, teaching, leading, and lifelong learning. She truly believes in the power of connection and thoroughly enjoys building relationships by reaching out with kindness and gratitude. Livia lives by the belief that it is through every interaction that we have the opportunity to appreciate and uplift others to help make their day a brighter one. Her other passions include family and ringgit as a volunteer coach, executive member, referee, and player. For over 20 years, Livia has continued to experience the joy of teaching in the Greater Vancouver area in British Columbia, Canada, and loves her role as a head teacher and classroom teacher. Previously, she served on the district staff development team and learning technologies supporting K-12 educators. Currently, Livia is honored to be the digital content editor and ambassador for the Teach Better team and loves being a part of this family. Her motto is working together to better ourselves, each other, and the world around us. Let's get better. Hello and welcome back to the Counter Narrative Podcast. I am so happy that you have returned and that you are listening to another episode. And I'm super excited to bring to you guys someone who I have had the honor of connecting with. Unfortunately, not in person, not on one of these episodes, but definitely in the Twitter realm. Livia Chan, we've connected, and I'm excited. Jokingly, we talked about having an opportunity to learn a little more about one another with a little more than 140 characters. So, Livia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Charles. I'm so excited to be here. I feel very honored and blessed to have the opportunity to chat with you and to get to know you better too. So thank you.
No problem. Like I said, I'm very excited that we finally get to connect in this space. But here's the thing. I know a little bit about you through our connections, and I'm sure that some of our listeners do too. But before we jump in, could you please share just a little bit about yourself, what role you have in education, maybe how you got there? And I like if our guests sometimes share maybe just a little something interesting about themselves.
Sure, I'd love to share. So I have been teaching for about 22 years in the Greater Vancouver area in BC, Canada. And I'm currently a grade 5 teacher as well as a head teacher. So a head teacher here is, I guess you would say, sort of like an AP in the States, okay, where we just I have about 30% of my time is admin time. So I work with the principal and just, support her in all the things that we need to do to lead the school. And I started out teaching grade 2-3 for about 13 years and then moved into a support role in the district, our staff development team in learning technologies. So worked with a number of different schools to kind of help work with principals and moving their teachers forward in terms of integrating more technology with curriculum. So I did that for about 6 years. And so I've been back in the classroom for 3, teaching from grade 1 to 5 in the last 3 years. I've been at 3 different schools in the last 3 years. So I'm hoping to settle at this school for a little bit. Um, and the interesting fact, I think it's interesting, is I play a sport called ringette. I don't know if a lot of people know what that is, even across Canada, but it's a Canadian made sport. Um, so I play it, I coach it, I ref it, and I'm also part of the executive. So it's a sport played on ice, so it kind of looks like hockey, except there's no blade on the stick, and we chase around a blue ring.
Okay. Are you, so I'm assuming you're on skates, right?
Yes, we're on
And
skates. Yeah,
then,
so I've been involved for about a dozen years or so.
okay. And, what do you do with this ring?
So we have a stick that looks like a hockey stick without the blade,
Okay.
and so we pass the ring. And so it's like hockey in that there are five players on the ice. You have a center, a forward, defenseman, a goalie, and so the idea is that you shoot the blue ring into the net.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a team sport. It's a great team sport.
Wonderful. Yeah, I've never heard of it, but definitely want to look into it now.
I'll send you a link.
So you mentioned that you've been at three schools over the last 3 years, and
Yes.
I, there was a time in my career I did that exact same thing. I was literally a principal at three different schools, 3 different years, and
Wow.
I'm can only imagine that, it's frustrating, right? You don't really get to gain any traction, but you do get to see some amazing and great things. And so, I'm curious. You've spent 22 years in education, and especially over these last few years, being in different grades and at different schools, could you share with us just maybe something that you're doing a little bit different, innovative, or in going with the theme of the show, a way that you're trying
Mhm.
to challenge the way we're doing education?
Yes, I'd love to. So, one of the things that I really was looking forward to after being on staff development is going back to the classroom, because then I can take what I've learned and what I've been teaching other teachers to do and just really integrating that for myself. So, one of the things that I really believe in is that learning is on a continuum and that there's progression, right? And we take kids where they are, meet them where they are, and move them forward and celebrate all of their growth. And so here in where I am, we are actually a district and actually province. We have a newer curriculum that's about, I want to say, 5 or 6 years old, and we're moving towards standards based grading. And so by the end of this year in my district, like schools, elementary schools that are K to 7 will have no grades. And so that really excites me because, just the idea of grades and removing of that and just, the report cards that we write, I always say is kind of like a love letter to my students. It's we include their voice in there, so they do reflections, and that's put right in the report card, and we just really celebrate all the growth that they show. So I think it's kind of like moving away from, or what I like to do is move away from, standing at the photocopier, copying, reams of booklets and worksheets and things like that, and moving away from the one size fits all, right? So that all learners can learn in different ways. And so one of the things that I recently came across, I don't know, Chad Ostrowski from Teach Better?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so this is the question that he posted in Voxer, and because we were talking about meeting kids where they are and all that. And his question was, would the lesson change if no students were in the room? And, that was something that really struck me, because when I think about when I went to school and, even not that long ago, you think about teachers standing in the front of the room, and really, like, it wouldn't matter if there was anyone in the room because it's just the teacher talking, right? And so what I've really tried to do is really try to make learning engaging and meaningful. So whatever it is I have to teach, I always think, okay, how can I make this more fun? How can I include them in the learning? And, maybe add elements of a game, or offer choice and opportunities. Like, I always tell the kids, if I forget to offer you choice, you can always come ask for it. So that, when I want to plan things that have like a low floor, high ceiling tasks, right? Where they're provided opportunities to be the teacher, for example. Um, and I'd really try to make things novel too, right? Because the more you teach things the same way, the more they just kind of get used to it. But throw in a little bit of novelty, and then they get excited and more engaged. Um, and just like I always think, there's just so many different ways that you can teach children. I just love moving away from what I did when I was a kid, right? So anytime that there's an opportunity that they can learn with somebody else, collaboration, uh, voice and choice, things that they can include that really follow what they're interested in. I think I've just seen such great benefit to that kind of teaching.
So, I really want to dive in. If we can go back a little bit,
Hmm.
you mentioned standards-based grading, and then you're like, and they just kept moving, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa,
Sorry.
like this is a huge, huge thing, and maybe not for everyone, but I know personally, this is something that I am super passionate about, something that I have been talking about and trying to figure out, how do we make this thing work? I mean, it sounds great in the theory,
Hmm.
but in so many areas and levels, like how does it work? And so, I had a few questions for you. I know that you mentioned that in grades K through 7,
Hmm.
that there wouldn't be any grades. And so I'm curious, I'm assuming then for that secondary level, are they still utilizing a traditional grading scale?
They are. So for grade eights and nines, they've removed percentages. So students only receive the grades on the report card.
Okay.
And but for 10 through 12, they receive percentages and grades.
Okay. Yeah, because my very first kind of thought was, how does that work? If I am applying for a high school, or well, here in Chicago, things are a little bit different. Literally going to high school is like going to college. You apply for the high school that you want to go
Oh.
to, unless you're just going to go to your neighborhood school. But you could apply, and there's applications and test scores, and it's
Hmm.
really, really competitive.
Mm.
And so, the question, especially at my building where K through 8 was, how would that look? If all of a sudden we have, which is going to be my next question for you, kind of this scale, right? This kid has a
Right,
3. What does that
right.
mean? How does that roll over into this bigger picture? And so I guess that was going to be a question that I had for you, is what is the scale that you're using, and kind of what does it mean? But I guess more so, how does that reflect on a much larger picture? I think you said your entire province has adopted this, correct?
Yes, so our new curriculum, we are hopefully moving everybody towards the standards-based grading system. And then it takes time for each district within the province to implement. And
Sure.
so our district has been working on it probably for the last 5 or so years. And slowly but surely, communicating with the parents, informing them, and we've had lots of pilot projects across different schools. We've done a lot of training and development in this area. We have a pretty robust staff development team, so everybody has gone and just has their own way of trying to train teachers in how we are assessing kids now. So there's been a big push and with support to prepare parents and students and teachers so that we better understand this proficiency scale. So our proficiency scales, it's a 4-point scale: emerging, developing, proficient, and then extending. And so there's language around that, and just practice and really helping the kids see their strengths and their their areas that they need to grow in, and then celebrating their growth.
That I'm sorry, I'm just sitting here like taking notes and thinking, because I absolutely despise our traditional and archaic grading system.
Mm-hmm.
And just the other day I was having a conversation with someone, like, well, how do you figure out if they're on a one, a two, a three, or a four? And, are you grading each thing? Well, what are you using to grade each thing? And, you know, I,
Hmm.
I know that there's a lot of, I guess, pushback or hesitations. And so I'm curious, on your journey as an entire province, as you've been rolling this out, have you noticed any of those things, any struggles or pushback from colleagues, from students, or even from parents?
Well, I think one of the biggest pieces, because ultimately it comes down to reporting, right? Like at the end of the day, parents want to see how is my child doing, right? And so there's been a lot of information sessions, like just to help parents understand what the difference is. And there's so many times that parents open up their report card and the first thing they look for are the grades, right?
Hmm.
And so it's been nice to be able to move away from that. So it's very interesting that you asked this question, because we've had schools, or I've been part of schools where we've switched over, and we always say to parents, if you really want to know what your child's grade is, we can offer that to you, right? So, and a lot of parents don't, because once they see the report card and once they are able to celebrate the true growth that they've seen in their children, they don't feel like they need to see the grade. But I have a story that there is a parent that did go back to the principal and say, well, okay, this is fine and dandy. I can see where my child is at, but I still want to see the grades. So they went back to the teacher and asked for the grades. And it was interesting because the child actually didn't feel as good about themselves after they saw the grade, if
Mm.
you know what I mean. And the parent even came back to say, I actually kind of wish I didn't ask for the grade. That, but moving forward, this parent just fully understood now that the new reporting with the proficiency scale was sufficient.
It's interesting that you say that. Our progress reports just came out.
Hmm.
And I took a moment and I was just looking at them and reflecting literally. So it's interesting how, kind of the universe works, that, here I have you on today and we're talking about the very same thing I was just discussing last week. And traditionally a letter C means that you've met the standard, but we are become so accustomed with having A's and B's and the honor roll and this
Hmm.
like 4.0. And so, the suggestion there, if we really consider it, is that you are like far exceeding standards at all times, when, there's this kind of, I guess, a stigma around receiving like a letter C. But
Hmm.
in reality, it's like, no, you've met the goal, you've met the
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that you mentioned that, kind of stripping that away and just saying, hey, you know what, you're still working towards mastery. That's all we're looking
Hmm.
for. That you're,
Exactly.
yeah, like, or even on the other side, I've had students who've gotten an A and it's kind of like, cool, I'm done. Like, no,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. And that's why I really like how we have the top level extending, because you can extend your knowledge in so many different ways. And that's another thing that I feel like I get on my soapbox a little bit, is that there's too many times that I see that, you know, teachers, I mean, we're still learning, right? And so they still teach to up to the level where they need to go at or get at. And but then they don't allow opportunity for extension. And so, you might have kids that have the ability, desire, and passion for extending, but then they're only given up to that point. And so, they won't see or even have the opportunity to extend. And so I'm not sure if I'm making this clear, but what I was trying to say earlier about the low floor, high ceiling is that I want to have a program where the kids have that opportunity to extend and not be limited by, say, like I said earlier, like a workbook, right? Where, okay, you finished it, you're proficient. That's it. That's the end of your learning. I always want to have it. Okay, now that you are proficient, what else can you do with this knowledge and understanding, and how can you go deeper based on what your interests are in, or what have you? And so I think that's just so important to offer that to students so that they can feel like, you take what you learn and then now you're applying it. Now you're comparing it, or you're analyzing it, or those kinds of like higher Bloom's taxonomy type learning. I think that's so important to offer kids. But I just don't see it enough yet, where it's just, okay, we learn up to proficient and that's it. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I think that ties back to the second part of what you opened with was, around student voice and choice.
Mm-hmm.
The idea to say, okay, you've reached this idea of proficiency, but what would you like to do with this? Where would you like your learning to go? And really allow students to take this, understanding, right? This proficient understanding of a skill or a concept, and say, what do you want to do with it? How do you want to extend it? Where do you want to go with this? And I think that part, like you mentioned, that's where the magic happens, if you will, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
now I could take it and run with it and really deepen my understanding, as opposed to, like you said, hey, I've demonstrated to you I was able to answer 10 out of 10 questions correctly. Now let's
Mm-hmm.
move on to the next topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it, and it could be simple things like, okay, now that you've learned it, let's offer you an opportunity to teach it, right? Like, that's something that I like to do in math, for example, because inadvertently every year I have kids that are like on the developing emerging level, and then kids already knowing what the learning outcomes are for that grade level, right? So how do you help both sides, or on the continuum, and just like letting them fly with things, right? And that's where I come back with the choice. Like, we had an activity where I just had them teach how to add with regrouping. And so I offered them different choices. And, one of the kids, like I said earlier, I like to offer them choice. And if I don't, then, come back to me and say, well, this is my idea. And one of the kids came up with using a different app on her iPad. And I caught myself, because this is like in reflection, but I was trying to sway him to use like an app that kind of made more sense to use. And then at the end of the day, I just said, that's great. You have a vision to use this different app. It was more like a puppet show app. And I said, go ahead and give it a try. Well, when he presented it, like, he knocked my socks off. In my mind, I just couldn't figure out how he was going to do it, but he did it, and he did it really well. And so, I actually had to apologize to him. I'm like, you know what? When we first talked and you said you want to use this app, I was trying to sway you to use another one, but you just knocked all our socks off. And, there's still like opportunities, right? If they have things that they see, like they've got a vision that, maybe I don't get to see, and allow them to try it. And they may fail, and that's okay. That's part of the learning. But they may, like I said, they may knock your socks off too.
I think a lot of what we're talking about makes absolute sense to us. I mean, it's clearly, we've been doing this for a little while. We could see the impact. We understand the importance. But I know that getting to these points isn't always easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with the listeners, like, yeah, I'm really big into using student voice and choice, or, we're making this shift to standards-based grading. But would you mind sharing, maybe a struggle or two that you've had along the way, and just kind of how you overcame those?
Well, I think, a lot of what I do, I've built over time. And so, anybody listening, it's not like I just snap my fingers and all of a sudden my eyes are open to all these things, right? Like, it takes time to do your professional development and learn from other people. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
getting connected. It's such a makes such a huge difference. Like, I am the teacher I am today because I've learned from so many other people, right? And so I think the struggles is trying different things. So, I like to make things fun. At the end of the day, when I'm planning for the next day, whatever concept it is, I'm always thinking, okay, how can I make this more interactive? Or how can I insert some element of fun? Or how can I, and, quite honestly, sometimes it doesn't go as how I planned, right?
Mhm.
But that's okay. And so, I've had lessons where it doesn't work. And so we just kind of, okay, let's just think of a different way. And that's okay. And it's like, that's my sandbox, right? And they'll see me struggle and try to figure out things, and they know that I'm doing the best that I can. And I always, at the beginning of the year, I always have, one of my first lessons is, we talk about our comfort circle, like our comfort zone, and then our stretch zone, and then our panic zone. And we draw it out. We write things that are in our comfort zone, stretch zone, and panic zone, and we refer to it pretty much every day. And so it's interesting because we recently did a self-assessment, and it was really interesting to see how many kids talked about being in their stretch zone. And, quite honestly, I can get so many kids to do and push themselves a little bit further because they know that when they're in their stretch zone, they're growing. And they know that when they stay in their comfort zone, they're not growing as much. They may still be growing. Um, but I think it's when they can see me in my stretch zone, right? And I'm modeling that, and I'm modeling that it's okay when things don't work out the way that they planned, that it makes it okay for them to try the same, right? So it's just something that I think makes such a big difference in modeling and just showing them and talking it through, and starting small, right? Like, we're not saying revamp the whole way that you teach, right? But it's like making small changes to your practice. And once you start seeing the extra joy that kids have when they come to school, and like, I've had kids, because I try to do something different every day, and like I told them that every day we're going to do something a little bit different, that I've had kids say, I really look forward to coming to school because I want to see what that little different thing
Mhm.
is, right? And,
Mhm.
we're in school for almost 200 days a year, right? Or give or take. And days can look quite the same day after day, right? And so, like I mentioned earlier, is that, like, make it novel, make it like do something a little bit different. And kids always love learning together. And I think that's one thing. We're face to face. We've been face to face back 100% in September. And one thing that I notice is that when they come to school now, they really appreciate coming to school. I think when they had a taste of remote emergency learning at home and not getting to see their friends and not getting to learn with each other, they actually appreciate it more. The opportunities that they have to see their friends and to learn with their friends. And we always have Thankful Thursdays where we share, something that we're thankful for, and that's something they pick to share quite often, is just that time to learn together. And so, I've noticed that when I put kids together to learn together, they learn it that much better, that much quicker. They're that much more engaged. At the end of the day, I'm sure I'm still, seeing what they can do independently and individually. But the learning process, you think about it, right, Charles? How many times do you feel like you have more fun when you're working with a partner
Well,
than when you're
absolutely.
working alone? So it's just little things like that I really try to incorporate. Um, and so I feel like I teach things a little bit differently, and I'll say that to parents. And, one of the things recently, I received an email from a mom. I feel like I teach math differently. I don't teach the textbook. I try to make everything really fun because kids always seem to come to me with a somewhat fixed mindset about math. Like, they don't like
Mhm.
math
Mhm.
or they hate math. And so I really, in the beginning of the year, try to make math so fun that they will, you know, change their mindset and at least feel like they can do math. And so I've got a little girl in my class who really struggles, and so we've learned in so many different ways. And her mom emailed me just I think last week, and she said, I remember picking up my daughter one day, and she was asking how her date went, and she said to her, "I love math mom now, mom." And so she said, I thought you hated math." And then she says, "Well, my teacher teaches me in a different way and I understand it better. And so now I love math." And so she's, this little girl has come to me a few times after a math lesson and go, "I love math." And it just like warms my heart, because I just feel like if I were a teacher that photocopied, pages and taught to the textbook, she'd probably still be struggling. But
Yeah.
it's just by making those small changes, right? It doesn't have to be big changes. Making small changes, playing, like learning through games, learning with each other, and again, going back to the grades, like she did not receive, a mark on her report card. What she received were just strengths and growth areas in math. And how can she not feel good about herself, right? So I can't even remember what original question.
No, it's fine. I was going to say that you're right. You so often hear, "I hate math," or "I hate this," and
Yes,
I don't think it's a matter of I hate the subject. It's I hate that I'm struggling. I
yes.
hate how we're doing this.
Mhm. And how they
That's
feel about themselves.
exactly. And so, the idea again, and you tied it right back to this idea, of moving away from a letter grade, because
Mhm,
now you're saying you're praising me for the growth that I've
mhm,
made.
mhm,
You're showing me areas that I can continue growing, and it's not just a letter, right?
mhm,
Which again we've stigmatized, and so we say this letter means this, and that you've been reduced to a single character, and that is all, right? You spent 9 weeks, doing your very best, hopefully,
mhm.
right?
Right,
And you've been
right.
reduced to a single letter. It's like that.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
how dehumanizing is that?
For sure. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, it's like we always have to ask ourselves, what's best for kids, right?
Hmm.
And I say it
Hmm.
again, like, what's best for kids? Is it photocopying a worksheet so that they can, you know, fill it out, or is it allowing them to learn it in a different way? And, I mean, I still have kids that love the worksheets and they ask for it. And I'm not saying that I don't give worksheets. I'm not saying that at all, right? But I think, when it's just finding different ways to reach these children. And so, if you give different options and different ways for them to learn, they're probably going to learn it better than if you only have one way. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And so, I'm curious. And you offered a lot of these, because I always like to kind of close things out with these ideas of what can educators do? What are some tips, some strategies, that they can walk away with? And, you've pointed out the fact that these things don't happen, right away, right?
Hmm.
You've been building these by connecting with educators over time. You've been trying new things and starting small and just kind of, learning from your mistakes, and even owning and accepting those mistakes,
Hmm.
along the way. So if there's an educator that's listening right now, and whether it's really trying to embrace the idea of student voice and choice, kind of like letting go and allowing students to have that, or whether it's trying in their own ways to get away from traditional grading practices, even if their school or their district isn't, adopting something different. What might be one thing or two, if you want, right? Something that you would leave listeners with, an idea to walk away with.
Well, in terms of the grading practices, I think if, diving into and following people that are already doing standards-based grading, right? And starting to read books and articles and trying to understand that a little bit better. And, grades can still, obviously if that's something that you have to do. But I think once you start diving into it and just learning a little bit more about it and talking to people that already are a little further along in it, I think, and really being able to celebrate students' strengths, I think they'll start to see that it makes a difference, right? And you know, I'd also say, like, don't be afraid to talk to your kids. Like, in in my self-assessment, I even asked them, I said, okay, it's your turn to give Miss Chan a report card. Like, so I just asked them, well, what do you think of my teaching style? What do you like that you want me to keep doing? And what are some things that you would like to see changed? And, it was incredible feedback, Charles. For the most part, the kids loved what, and said, I wouldn't change a thing, but there were some pieces that like I got from kids that I would not have known if I didn't ask them. And part of it was just helping them understand why we do some of these things, and so they're more able to understand the purpose behind some of the things that we do. And then there's some things that, like, I've already changed my practice to better meet their needs, and I just feel like if I didn't ask them, they could have gone a whole year without me knowing, right? And then I felt bad, like, oh, I should have asked them sooner, and things like that. But I always say to them that we are co-constructors of our curriculum, and you know we do this together. And I'm one, obviously I'm the leader in the classroom, and I come up with these activities and things like that. But I'd say, like, don't be afraid to ask your kids what they need or what they like. And obviously it's still you that is the main person that's planning these uh, lessons and units and projects and things like that. But hearing from the kids is invaluable. And it, I think, again, go back to what's best for kids. Hearing from them makes such a big difference. So, I had even some of my colleagues say, "Wow, you're brave for to give you feedback." I'm like, "Yeah, yes, I am." And but I want to get better, right? And so
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
about me helping myself become better so that I'm better for them. And so I highly recommend that. I mean, you can phrase your questions in a way that, you know, um, might limit them if you're too afraid of hearing their feedback. But, you know, in where I am, we don't have teacher evaluations. So we don't get to hear from our principals, like, how we're doing from their point of view. And really, at the end of the day, I've heard enough about them that the principals come in for like one lesson, and usually it's like, you've really thought carefully about that one lesson, but it may not be indicative of how you always teach, right? So who should be the ones that's giving your evaluation is your children, right? So that would be one piece of advice is, like, don't be afraid to hear from your kids and to co-construct your curriculum with them, and just to see what they like.
That is powerful. And I'm sure I don't know. I'm starting to become less and less apologetic, and that's okay. Right. This
Hmm.
is kind of, but I could only imagine that the teachers who are afraid, like, why
Yeah,
are you afraid to get that
yeah.
feedback? Because
Hmm.
to me, if you're afraid to get the feedback, then that means that somewhere that there's something that you're not doing, or something that you could be doing better on,
Yes.
and I mean, it's not like you said, right? And unless somebody gets super creative and uses student feedback as part of your evaluation, but
Hmm.
like, you're right. What more valuable source of feedback than the individuals who you interact with every day for, like you
Hmm.
said, almost 200 days? Like,
Hmm.
I would much rather hear from those individuals than, some principals, I'll say that, who pop in, right, once in a while. And so that's powerful. So I'm glad you shared that.
Well, it's part of my reflection, right? Like, my kids, they reflect on a lot of their work, and the first question I have them ask themselves is, well, what are your strengths? What did you do well? the second one is, well, what did you find challenging, or what was in your stretch zone? And then the third question is, well, what would you do differently next time? And so I feel like, if I'm asking them to reflect, I think I need to do the same, and to show them that it's okay for me to ask for feedback, and because I give them feedback too, right? But it's okay for me to ask for feedback, and then show them how I use their feedback in order to make myself better, right? And just to model that whole process of learning, and every day we're learning, and every day I'm seeking to be better as a teacher, right? It's like the teach better way, right? Better today than yesterday, better tomorrow than today, right? So I think it's just so important to uh, allow them to see that, and to be vulnerable in that way as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think there it is, right? This idea of don't ask of others that which you're not willing to do
Yeah.
yourself. Model it. Say it's more than just academics. So
Hmm.
I'm so glad that we are ending on that note, because that is a powerful takeaway. So listeners, if you need to rewind a few seconds, right, to go back and listen to that over and over again, because that is like the takeaway. I mean, everything else we talked about was important, but I really think that was a huge takeaway. So before we wrap up here, I am sure that there are people who are listening that would love to continue learning from you and to connect with you. So share with us, Livia, how can people find you? Where should they look?
I would absolutely love to connect with your listeners. I'm most active on Twitter, so I can be found at Livia Chan L. Also on Instagram and Facebook, but not as active. I do have a website. It's livchan.com. So I do a little bit of blogging, and I've got some um, other things, other projects, and other previous podcasts that I've been on that people can listen to as well. So thanks for asking.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I'm sure that people are going to want to connect, and so thank you for sharing. Um, but more importantly, I just want to say thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. It is clear that you are committed to really pushing back and kind of changing, right, what it is that we're doing in education. Um, and I think that's great. So I want to say thank you for not only being on the show, but thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Charles. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and to share some of the things that I think about, and some of the things that I do in my classroom. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
I want to thank you for listening to the Counter Narrative Podcast. If you like what you are hearing, please be sure to like and subscribe. The show can be found on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and several of your other favorite platforms. This podcast is also featured on schoolrubric.com, where you can find educational articles, videos, and interviews with educators from around the globe. Be sure to connect with the host and other listeners by following the show on Twitter at the CN Podcast and joining the show's Facebook group. Take care.